Good evening, everyone. My name is Lori Pasteryak, and excited to welcome you to this evening's program, which is Changemakers and Storytellers with Patricia Caso. So my name again is Lori Pasteryak, and I am the Director of Interpretation at the Fairfield Museum and History Center. Our website is www.fairfieldhistory.org. We are a community-supported organization, so if by the end of this program you really enjoyed everything we have to say, you can make a donation on our website. Again, that's www.fairfieldhistory.org. It is my pleasure to welcome to you as we celebrate Women's History Month this program in which we are welcoming again Patricia Caso to talk a little bit about the amazing women that surround us in this world. So Patricia was a successful television producer and executive producer for over 15 years. She freelanced for syndicated shows and got involved with volunteering for several nonprofit groups, like here at the museum and around, of course, the area. She also raised two sons with her husband, Lawrence Caso. And, Pat took the opportunity to combine all of the experiences from her nonprofit work to her production experience with her regard for social impactors to both write an interview for the Women's Eye site back in 2012. And she's still, of course, very much involved with the Women's Eye today. And today, of course, we're talking about 20 women changemakers taking action around the world, with that she interviewed and co-edited with author Pamela Burke. Soon, a second anthology, which she's going to talk a little bit about today, 20 Women Storytellers Taking Action with Powerful Words and Images, will be available soon. And with that, I'd love to welcome to the stage Pat Caso. Hello, Pat. Welcome.
Thank you, Lori. That was a beautiful introduction. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
And go ahead.
We're so excited to have you here. And I will say that Pat and I have been trying to put together this presentation for you since last March of Women's History Month. And due to the pandemic, we have been playing around with different dates because we wanted to be live with you in person, but decided, hey, it's March. We're going to do it. We're going to go for it. And so that is why we are here tonight with you online, virtually, live.
And it works. So Anyway, I'm excited to be here too. And first and foremost, thank you. And thank you to the staff at the Fairfield Museum and History Center for inviting me, part of the Women's Eye team, to participate in your Women's History Month. You have really terrific speakers and presenters here. And I appreciate now being included in your team.
Happy to have you.
Right. And also, I want to thank everyone out there who is joining us in this presentation, too. We really appreciate it. And speaking of the Museum and History Center and Women's History Month, much of history and her story, right, centers around the storytelling of women and men who are making a difference and being change makers. And these change makers are all different types of people, whether they be in the public eye or whether they are decision makers or they're in positions of power, celebrity, or someone making a difference in his or her community who has no public face. And that's where the Women's Eye comes in. Publisher and founder Pam Burke, who is the founder of the Women's Eye, realized that many of these change makers, storytellers, entrepreneurs are women under the radar. Pam wanted to highlight the amazing women creatively initiating ideas for change, moving communities forward, boldly righting injustices despite personal jeopardy in some cases. And these proactive women are everywhere, worldwide, in every community. On thewomenseye.com, these women not only make interesting interviews about their passions, but we get to know the women themselves, their motivations to inspire us. Through podcasts with veteran journalists Catherine Anaya and Stacy Gualandi and old-fashioned interviews from contributors like me, TWE wants readers and listeners to take away something from every interview and perhaps take their own action. All the women on the Women's Eye site and in these books are passionate, creative, purpose-driven, and impactful. With that in mind, I want to share the stories of 3 such women from our first book, 20 Women Changemakers, Taking Action Around the World. We featured women who were instrumental in moving communities forward with their creative ideas, are showing compassion for those less fortunate, and solving issues of inequity. 3 of the 20 women profiled in the book, and there are so many more on the site, represent the best efforts that make us, our communities, countries so much better. First up is Maggie Doing, whom I had the pleasure of speaking with. You know the expression, in the blink of an eye? Well, on a volunteer trip during a gap year between high school and college, 18-year-old Maggie Doing from Mendham, New Jersey, made a life-changing decision to adopt a child in Nepal and remain in Nepal, creating one of the most amazing stories, one of the most remarkable ventures that subsequently continues to benefit so many hundreds of Nepalese children and the Nepalese community, all in the blink of an eye decision. Here's how it happened. Maggie originally met a Nepalese refugee in the Indian camp where she was volunteering and decided to see where she came from. And Maggie told me this: I had no idea what I was getting into. I ended up busing for 2.5 days and hiking with her over 2 more days to a remote part of the war-torn Himalayas. I saw poverty on a scale I had never seen or imagined before. There was a whole desperately poor community of kids, mostly young girls, breaking rocks into gravel by the riverbed. They hauled bags of rocks on their backs to make $1 for food. They were called porters. Then Maggie met Hema. Every day, Hema, who was about 6 or 7 years old, carried heavy pounds of rocks on her back. Yet she would always engage Maggie with a Nepalese for hello, hi. Maggie questioned, why wasn't she at least in school? The answer was that it cost too much, $5. Can you imagine $5 too much for school? Other child porters also had no family, no home. And Maggie reflected, what have we done as a human family that people should live like this? It was the first time I ever felt ashamed to be human. She also found the hopelessness she witnessed was monumental. As she says, I later found this horror was reality for 80 million kids worldwide. How did I not know about this? I had to do something, and I had to do it now. I thought, what if I just started with Hema, paying for her school uniform, books, adopting her so she would have a home? So Maggie started by asking her family to send her the $5,000 in savings she earned from babysitting. Maggie wasn't going back home, and she was not going to college. There were a number of other kids who needed the help, and Maggie adopted them as well. Now, with over 40 legally adopted kids in her home, a school with over 400 children, a women's resource center, and with the pandemic hitting that area, a food bank, Maggie has gone far beyond that initial adoption and is not looking back. As she says, I wanted to flip these kids' world around with love through having a home and a family. Everything I started to create was based on that. I was also truly amazed with Maggie's savvy at being able to raise additional funds over these years to build a children's home, a resource center for women, and more. She engaged the Circuit community for not only building the home, but helping in various areas of childcare and education. As compelling a story as Maggie has, her influence on the lives of the Nepalese community is huge. And as a role model for change, absolutely invaluable. Another remarkable woman is Lauren Daniels, a mom, a cancer survivor who started the Happily Ever After League in HEAL in Phoenix, Arizona. Lauren was only 35 when she was diagnosed with breast cancer. Even though she didn't have to go through chemo because it was caught early enough, she racked up bills totaling $4,000, having much needed surgeries. That was money she didn't have and had to pay over time. At the time, she was a mom to 3 kids, ages 1 through 11. And being a mom means you don't stop parenting, no matter what. As Lauren says, I had 3 surgeries in a 4-month span of time. I always say that for a mom to have a common cold is a luxury. There would be days I'd cry in the shower, but when they were all looking up at me, I was trying to forge on. Yet, Lauren felt fortunate. She had been hearing that women were taking the city bus to and from their breast cancer surgery. Some couldn't even afford the medications they needed for treatment. Others had $100,000 worth of medical bills. Lauren was deeply bothered by all of that. She decided she was going to provide hope to as many moms as she could who were struggling as they were also going through cancer treatment. Many in her family and friend circle wanted her to wait a bit, but as Lauren shared, my parents, my husband, and all my good friends knew that once I make my mind up, I'm going to do this. So they can either get on board or just get out of my way. I love her. Just 1 year after her diagnosis, Lauren held the first fundraiser for her HEAL program, which helps out with bills, gas, groceries, and so on. She raised $50,000 her first time out. HEAL is now also a home where families can spend extended time as their mom goes through chemo or surgery. Now, we were all curious, how did Lauren come up with that name, HEAL? According to Lauren, it actually came to her in a dream. She knew she wanted to start a foundation with an uplifting name. Everything kept sounding like it was a retirement home. One morning she woke up, she says, and the words happily ever after kept ringing in my head. Thinking about what that meant, she shared, I lived happily ever after my cancer diagnosis, and others can as well. We came up with Happily Ever After League, and it spelled the word heal, and it's worked for us beautifully. Now, I had to include some of these pictures as part of Lauren's story because they are amazing. One of Lauren's most successful yearly HEAL fundraisers is the Fairy Tale Tea, which has really taken off and is very creative and incredibly beautiful event. A hostess picks a fairy tale theme, decorates, and invites friends to tea. Look at these tables like this Cinderella table. And we have Madeline. Madeline is up next, which is great. I love these tables. They're so beautiful and so much fun. And we have a little Toy Story coming up here. Isn't that cool? I just love that idea. And what a terrific idea. Just so much fun. It's very uplifting. And what a terrific fundraiser to help those who need it in a very tough time. The very creative way Lauren uses to not only raise money for HEAL, but to reach out and help those moms who, like Lauren did, are struggling on top of healing. This is truly life affirming. Another woman I want you to meet is Estelle Pyfrom. Estelle's story is inspiring from start to finish, and her story is still going. Known as Gadget Lady to her Florida students, this second oldest daughter of 7 children grew up in the segregated South. She was part of a migrant family that traveled from Florida to New York and back during the summer months. Estelle retired after 50 years as a teacher and guidance counselor in Palm Beach County, Florida. But I found there was no tired in retired for her. She could not walk away from the students whom she knew were falling behind because they had no access to a computer, which is, as we all know, a must for an even playing field in education these days. Estelle had to think of a way to get technology out to the underserved neighborhoods. She knew she was going to need a vehicle of some kind. The van she had would not be big enough. Estelle even thought of a semi truck, one of those 18-wheelers, but she couldn't drive that. So her brilliant solution? Buy a bus, which she learned to drive as a teen, outfit it with computers, and roll it into the underserved neighborhoods to beat that digital divide between the haves and the have-nots. Thus, the brilliant bus. All the funding came from Estelle's personal retirement money, some investments, and side jobs. Talk about being totally selfless. The bus, 17 computer stations, infrastructure, the internet, and so on were purchased with her own funds. She reached out to more than 31,000 children over her first 3.5-year period. The youngest is a group of 3-year-olds. The oldest is 81. Estelle has no age limit in learning or working on computer skills. The bus now does more than roll into neighborhoods bridging the digital divide. Actually, Estelle sees this project as a movement. Under the Brilliant Bus umbrella, she works with those who feed the hungry, serves as a reference for health services, private clinics, doctors, and so on. Estelle looks at what she can do for the whole situation and collaborates with partners. I was also intrigued with Estelle's work ethic, having a childhood as a migrant worker and parents who had only elementary educations. Estelle told me the attitude about migrants when I was growing up was that we would never catch up. You were always going to be behind and never graduate from high school. Well, the attitude my parents had about education was, you do what you have to do. Sure, you have to leave school before it ends for the summer to do harvesting work. You have only one option, to make the grades. When Estelle was growing up, she never thought about being a teacher, yet she was very aware that none of the neighborhood families had very much. They shared a lot, helped each other, and looked out for each other. It was a way of life. Once she finished high school and college, she wanted to come back and help her neighborhood. Estelle understood the needs of those communities, and ultimately, teaching fit in. Her husband said it best. He once told Estelle that she is one of the ordinary people who is making a difference and helping change the world, expecting nothing in return. Who would have thought an old bus could make a difference in helping solve the digital divide? Estelle pulled it off and is still making an impact. As with all our TWE women, it doesn't get better than that. Don't you love these three? Lori, I can't hear you.
We're on mute because the
Okay.
delay of the pandemic. Something always strikes me about the women that you talk about that are in the Changemakers group, and it's that they work with communities. They become aware of a situation, of a problem, of a challenge, and they find a way to work with the community to solve the problem, not necessarily change the community. Um,
Correct.
they do end up changing the community, but they do it through such an compassionate and with empathy.
Mhm.
And what is it that you found really tied all of them together? You know, was it just that, or was there something a little bit more that really brought them together for this book?
Well, I think in each case, and certainly there are far more on the site as well, but in each case, there's a real heart that they connect with the people that they are trying to help, or that a problem that they're trying to solve, and their heart and their drive is just so important to them that they don't give it up, and they're able to attract people to work with them to help them execute their ideas. um, but it's that connection, that human um, heart, that they can't let this go. They have to make a difference, and they have an idea, and they're going to make that idea work no matter what. Estella with her bus, maybe I'll do an 18-wheeler. Can you imagine that? Oh my gosh. But I believe if she had to, she'd do that. And Maggie Doing out there with these kids, just gut wrenching. And her whole life has been devoted to this, and she hasn't looked back. It's just remarkable. And their heart, their drive is just amazing. And they connect with the people, they connect with the situation. And that kind of compassion turned into action is what is so impressive about all of these women.
We can no longer do it alone.
No.
That is for sure. We never could. We always have our partners and our helpers around us supporting us.
Yes.
And with that, I was thinking about, you just mentioned taking action, which to me, as we've talked about this next publication, that's really kind of where I feel as if you're going to introduce to us people who really bring a little bit even more action, if we haven't seen enough already, and change and support and love, but even more bringing attention.
Yeah.
So would you like to
There's
talk about this next book?
Oh, sure. This is a wonderful project, and I just think it's a different way of taking action. There's still the connection, there's still the heart, and there's still the desire to make people understand. And encouraged by the success of our first book, we we decided to do a second anthology, and give you a little preview today of three women from that. And it's focused on a whole new group of fascinating women, 20 women storytellers taking action with powerful words and images. It's centered on broadcasters, journalists, photographers, and documentarians, women who are taking action every day, bringing us truth, connection, and thoughtfulness. And I'll start here with the fearless Heidi Levine. And that photo says it all, doesn't it? Heidi Levine is a mom and an award-winning photographer, a special breed of photojournalist. Her work takes her to war zones, hot conflict zones, and dangerous riots. Heidi has captured stunning photos in the midst of action during revolutions in the Egypt and Libya, the crisis in Syria, the Lebanon-Israel war, to name a few. She uses powerful images to tell the story of what is going on, and importantly, she wants people to connect with her pictures. When she was a kid, Heidi volunteered and worked with special needs children, worked as a candy striper in the hospital at age 14, worked with the elderly in their homes and in a nursing home, and worked on a suicide hotline. She was always obsessed with learning about the different underserved neighborhoods in the Boston, and New York area. Heidi's father would take her along on a business trip to New York City and point her in the direction of a museum. But she would sneak off to Harlem. She studied sociology and psychology and really thought of becoming a sociologist or psychologist or becoming a doctor. But photography ended up becoming her calling. Heidi says she has tried to use the power of photography as her best tool to help others make a difference, showcasing the needs or events. Heidi is also very open about being a working woman in a predominantly male field. She is always prepared to go on assignment into violent and some heartbreaking circumstances. Initially, her boss felt like she would be in too much danger before she even had a chance to have a family. Yet after she became a mother, her boss felt like she was going into situations that were too dangerous because she was a mother. But none of that stopped Heidi. It is precisely because she is a mom and a woman that Heidi says, I try my best to bond with people I am documenting. And being a woman and even explaining at times that I am also a mother often helps people trust me. Heidi always enjoyed taking pictures of people rather than still life. As far as where she gets the courage for risk, Heidi has a great story. I had my first front page in the Boston Globe as a small kid, but not as a photographer. My parents took me to a dog show in Boston, and I climbed into the cage of one of the dogs. A Globe photographer captured the moment, and it was published on the first page. I guess I have been blessed to be both the subject of it on a front page and have my photographs published. Maybe it also shows that from a young age, it was in my blood to take risks. As you can tell from this powerful sampling of Heidi's award-winning photos, Heidi Levine's talent and skill and courage have made a difference in how we see the truth in situations. Because of Heidi's photos, many are motivated to evaluate circumstances, connect with the story, and move forward to make positive changes. Next, I had a fascinating conversation with Dionne Serio, a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist at the New York Times. You may remember Dionne's front-page story about the kidnapped Boko Haram girls who were trained to be suicide bombers. It was a stunning story of how these girls escaped. They escaped by disobeying their training orders. Dionne was in West Africa tracking the girls' stories as part of her job as the West Africa bureau chief for the New York Times. Dionne wrote a terrific memoir about all of this, In Pursuit of Disobedient Women, which also includes the ups and downs of picking up her own family and moving thousands of miles away to West Africa. As far as her book's title, Disobedience for Dionne meant looking at women who literally defied orders of men in wartime, defied expectations of a patriarchal society, and looking at women who are some of the most invisible members of societies that are run by governments and boardrooms and even their families. They were not decision makers. They were not leaders of their families. And she wanted to see how they were upending societal expectations and just disobeying what was expected of them. Dionne herself was the main breadwinner for her family while in West Africa, which certainly upended expectations. However, Dionne is quick to add, I am well aware of my privilege and could never compare myself to the brave women I met who defied the societal expectations for them in so many clever ways. Dionne's reporting has been routinely impactful. In one story, she reported about a civilian massacre and interviewed many people in northeastern Nigeria, where the military had rolled into town and accused everyone of supporting Boko Haram or being Boko Haram members. The military lined up all the men and opened fire on all of them, and then went to a neighboring village. She met with one man who had been shot several times, but somehow miraculously managed to survive. Then she talked to other women who had seen what had happened to their husbands. After her story was published, the UN wound up not including Nigeria on the Human Rights Commission. She was proud of that story, and that story got a lot of attention. I particularly love the way Dionne sees empathy as a must to get a story, as well as get to the heart of her stories, to understand the human connection. Dionne says many people she interviewed had insanely traumatic experiences, and no one had ever bothered to ask what happened. A lot of them hadn't even told their mom or their husbands or anyone what had happened. They understood she could be a messenger to get the word out, and maybe someone could help or just even offer understanding of what they were going through. Dionne has covered everything from local government to courts to earthquakes, as well as a couple of stints during the Iraq War. Dionne and her family are back in New York now, and she continues her powerful storytelling at the New York Times. As Dionne says, I love to be able to shape the story, to think of a new idea, have people listen, and be that kind of conduit that helps people understand what's going on in that world. Well, every so often in life, things don't really work out the way you want or thought it would. And sometimes that ends up being okay. My final storyteller is a documentarian. We learned that KARE 11 in Minneapolis had a popular reporter in Lindsay Siebert, who always looked for the heart in a story and whose determination to show the reality of the situation was also her driving force. Lindsay's encounter with a principal at a failing school in North Minneapolis ultimately led to her powerful award-winning documentary, Love Them First. And if you think that love is simply warm and fuzzy, it wasn't. There were high expectations and a lot of responsibility for everyone involved. And as I found, the documentary story reaches far beyond the North Minneapolis school. Principal Maury Fresselben caught Lindsay's attention after Lindsay covered a violent shooting of a child right outside the grammar school. Lindsay was intrigued with Maury's honesty with the kids about the tragedy, as well as Maury's ideas for turning around a failing school in this poor, violent neighborhood beset with a variety of issues. In fact, it was the lowest performing school in the state. Lindsay also saw Maury's willingness to fight for her kids, be a disruptor and a protector in a way she hadn't seen before. Maury's message every morning to her students: you are the brightest, most intelligent, definitely best looking in all of North Minneapolis, and you are worth the cost. The students stand straight. Heads are high, shoulders are square, chests are out. They have been told that they are worthy, and they believe it. Importantly, Principal Maury held each student to high standards of responsibility and learning. In filming the documentary, Ben Garvin, Lindsay's co-director, and Lindsay recognized that they were white, privileged journalists entering a high-poverty crime area in which this failing school was located. Lindsay's challenge was that she and Ben had to be authentic to make their film. As Lindsay told me, we had to show diversity. We didn't want to pity or sensationalize. We also listened to the community who felt strongly about showing the grittiness. After a year of being embedded in the school with the kids, getting interviews, as well as teachers, showing the impact of positive curriculum changes and so on, things were looking up at the school. Enrollment was up and steady, kids were performing higher, and so on. The school was right in line for getting off a failing list, until it fell apart. The district made a clerical error and the children didn't actually score quite high enough. It was devastating for Lindsay and Ben's documentary's happy ending, and even more so for Maury and her students and teachers. However, what Lindsay and Ben realized as they've taken Love Them First around the country is that it's not a North Minneapolis story or a Minnesota story. It's an American story about every underachieving school system in American education. And how can we all work for the collective good of all our children? What a powerful story from a woman who never imagined she'd be a broadcaster and documentarian. Lindsay was always drawn to stories about the underdog. She says she was a pretty awkward child. I had crossed eyes and a lot of eye surgeries, thick glasses, really quiet, shy, and introverted. So writing was always my outlet. Despite misgivings about being on television, she knew herself to be a visual thinker and believed in the power of telling people's stories. According to Lindsay, I felt like I was doing a service, and that courses through my veins, giving me the wherewithal and the perseverance to keep going to this day. Lindsay now has her own studio, so she can develop and produce stories, she says, that create and spark empathy, stories that help people uncover their own biases and assumptions, the stories that would take us on a journey of the world that we want to create for our children and future generations. These are just a few of the Women's Eyes pieces which spotlight changemakers and powerful storytellers who are all history-making women. We hope our books intrigue readers and listeners to reflect on how we are all connected and just may be inspired to take our own actions to make our world that much better. Changemakers, by the way, is available through Amazon and bookstores, or you can order it through your bookstore. And soon Storytellers will be available as well. In fact, you can go to womenstorytellersbook.com to get details about all of that. And I have to thank you so much again for giving the Women's Eye the opportunity to share a few stories of the many fabulous women from here and around the world that are showcased on our site, thewomenseye.com. And Lori, I send it back to you with many, many thanks for giving us this opportunity. We appreciate it. And these women are amazing. Thank you.
Thank you. That was wonderful.
Oh, thank you. They're wonderful. They are really terrific.
They are, the women that you just highlighted from the Changemakers book, and then also the women documentary photographer, going into these stories, and the documentary, and all of them, they inspire me. How do they inspire you?
Well, I think I've learned a whole lot about myself in this particular chapter of my life working with the Women's Eye. First of all, it's humbling to see what these women are achieving and doing and inspiring in people. It's just magnificent. You want to be one of these people. And I think I've learned that, by contributing through volunteering and supporting some people's vision is equally as good. But I have to say that each person you get to interview, or one of my colleagues interviews on their podcasts, each one of them has an amazing story, and the creativity involved is pretty remarkable. And it's also taught me an awareness of the number of problems and issues that are out there that do need attention and do need support. It's broader than just the community. It's everywhere, and it's really interesting how these things are resolved, attacked. You're made aware of with these journalists and broadcasters, people who are actually doing it, like the Estellas of the world, and finally, an appreciation for the fact that I have this opportunity to work for the Women's Eye. I know that might sound a little off or whatever, but it has given me what Pam's vision is for shining a light on these women who are making a difference, who are inspirational. And they're all around us. They're every day. And as I tried to say in the open, they're not always in the public eye. They're not all celebrities. And we've done some celebrities on the Women's Eye, but it's all types of people, and they're just trying to make it better. And I truly appreciate what the opportunity to contribute to that on a small level to her big efforts here have been. So
I
that's it.
The biggest thing that I can identify with the work that the Women's Eye does and these books is the sharing of stories, the sharing of powerful stories of people who make history, not the hero, not the heroes that are in textbooks, the heroes that, the John Adams of American history, but our neighbors, communities, are the people who really make a difference in people's lives, just in the very basic forms, with the bus and access to computers, or the I need a ride to my doctor's appointment. Those everyday heroes are really beautiful. And museums, we try and do that work and document that history. And so books like this, Changemakers and Storytellers, and the work that the Women's Eye does allows us as a museum to be a platform for sharing those stories. And so
Excellent.
The writing of Pam Burke and the interviewing that you do and all of that producers do to kind of help share those stories, we see that as museums, and we're like, we need to save this. We need to share this, because in 50 years, people are going to want to know these stories. They're going to want to know this history. The people who made change on the ground every day, not necessarily the big names that you all hear. So thank you for doing this work, and thank you to the Women's Eye and Pam Burke for these books. And I'm so excited to see what you all do next.
Thank you.
I hope you have big plans.
We always have big plans.
Absolutely. Changing the world one step at a time with the strengths that we bring to the table.
Right. We try.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Pat, for joining us. And thank you for everyone who's out there watching. I see you all, and we love you dearly. And a special thank you out there from the Fairfield Museum and History Center for all of your time tonight. And again, happy Women's History Month, as we honored all of these women today, the work of the Women's Eye, and what we hope to acknowledge at the Fairfield Museum, that everyone has the power to make history and have conversations and inspire others to work for a better community for all of us. So thank you, Pat. Thank you so much for joining us, Pat Caso.
Thank you, Lori.
You're welcome. And if you happen to miss this live, you can certainly catch it on our Fairfield Museum YouTube channel, as well as our Fairfield Museum Facebook page. This video is recorded, and it will be available for all time, we hope. Thank you. I know, isn't that great? Thank you, everyone, and I hope you have a wonderful evening.
Thank you. Good evening.
Bye.